The train lurched to a stop with a groan of metal on ice, and Eliza's stomach clenched. Through the frost-caked window, Hecla looked less like a town and more like a scar on the landscape. A handful of structures huddled against the white brutality of Montana Territory, 1882. Buildings leaned into each other as if seeking warmth. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin, desperate threads that the wind immediately shredded. She pressed her palm against the glass. Cold bit through her glove. "End of the line, miss." The conductor's voice carried the weight of a man who'd delivered this news too many times. "Town ain't much, but it's what we got." Eliza stood, her traveling dress heavy with the grime of 3 days' journey. The carpet bag at her feet held everything she owned now. 2 dresses, a photograph she should have burned, her mother's wedding ring, and $17 she couldn't afford to spend. The other passengers had already fled into the storm, miners heading for the camps, a family that looked as desperate as she felt, a gambler who'd tried to sell her a watch in Bismarck. She was alone. The platform was a sheet of ice pretending to be wood. Her boots hit it and immediately slipped. She caught herself on a post, fingers screaming with cold even through the gloves. The wind didn't howl here. It attacked, driving snow horizontally into her face like 1,000 tiny blades. Her bonnet whipped back. Ice formed instantly in her hair. "Mrs. Hartwell?" The voice cut through the storm, and she turned. He was taller than she'd imagined, broader too. The photographs he'd sent had been stiff, formal. A man in a marshal's badge staring at the camera like it might draw on him. But here, wrapped in a coat dark with snow, his face was harder, more weathered. Lines carved deep around his eyes. A scar ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline. His jaw was set like a man expecting trouble. Marshal Caleb Rourke, her husband-to-be. The stranger who'd answered her advertisement with terms so cold they could have been a business contract. "Marshal Rourke," she had to shout over the wind. He didn't offer his hand. "Train's leaving in 5 minutes. You get back on. I'll understand. This ain't what most women expect." It was a test. She could see it in the way he stood, waiting, giving her the out. Part of her wanted to take it, to climb back into that warm car and ride it anywhere else. But the scandal back east had teeth, and her brother's debts had lawyers attached. There was no going back. "I didn't come here to turn around, Marshal." Something flickered in his eyes. Not warmth, exactly. Maybe respect. "Then we'd better move. Storm's getting worse." He took her bag without asking, and she followed him into the white. The town was closer than it looked. Everything in Hecla was close, she'd learned. Main Street was a rutted, frozen channel between buildings that leaned and sagged. A general store, a saloon with yellow light bleeding through gaps in the walls, a church that looked like it was losing a fight with the wind, and at the end, a small house with smoke rising from the chimney. "That's home," Caleb said, not slowing. "Reverend's waiting. We'll do this quick." Romantic. The Reverend was a thin man with kind eyes and hands that shook when he opened his Bible. His wife stood witness, her face carefully neutral. The room smelled like coffee and kerosene. A fire struggled in the hearth. "Dearly beloved," the Reverend started. "Just the vows," Caleb interrupted. "We ain't got time for the rest." The Reverend blinked but nodded. "Right. Do you, Caleb Thomas Rourke, take this woman?" "I do." "To be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to—" "I do," Caleb repeated, harder this time. The Reverend turned to Eliza. "And do you, Eliza Margaret Hartwell?" Her throat was dry. The room was too hot after the cold outside, and her hands were shaking. She looked at Caleb. He was staring at the Reverend, jaw tight, like a man enduring something necessary but unpleasant. This wasn't how she'd imagined her wedding. There should have been flowers, music, her father walking her down an aisle, her mother crying in the front pew. Instead, there was a stranger who couldn't meet her eyes, and a reverend rushing through the ceremony like he had somewhere better to be. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana and God Almighty, I pronounce you man and wife." No kiss. Caleb signed the certificate with quick, angry strokes. Eliza's hand shook when she added her name, her new name. Eliza Rourke. It looked wrong on the page, like a forgery. "Storm's getting worse," Caleb said. "We need to go." The walk to his house, their house, took 3 minutes but felt longer. The wind had teeth now. It found every gap in her clothing, every inch of exposed skin. By the time they reached the door, she couldn't feel her face. Inside was warmer but not warm. A single room divided by a curtain. Bed on one side, stove and table on the other. Shelves with canned goods. A chair. A rifle mounted on the wall. A photograph of a woman Eliza didn't recognize, face turned away as if the camera had startled her. Caleb set her bag down near the bed. "You'll sleep there. I'll take the floor till we get another room built on." "You don't have to." "I do." His voice was flat. "This is a business arrangement, Mrs. Rourke. I need a wife to keep this town from thinking I've gone wild. You need a home. We're clear on what this is." The words landed like stones. She'd known this, the letters had been explicit. But hearing it spoken in this room that smelled like wood smoke and loneliness made it real in a way ink on paper never could. "We're clear," she said quietly. He nodded. "Good. I've got rounds to make. Storm or no storm, there's always someone trying something stupid. Food's in the tins, coffee's on the stove. Don't wait up." He was gone before she could respond, the door slamming shut behind him with a finality that echoed. Eliza stood in the middle of the room, her room now, and listened to the storm tear at the walls. She should unpack, make coffee, do something. Instead, she sank onto the bed and stared at the photograph of the woman she didn't know. A previous wife, a sister. Someone he'd loved? The bed was hard and smelled like cedar. The blanket was wool, scratchy against her fingers. Outside, the wind screamed. She'd married a stranger to escape scandal. Now she was alone in a frozen room in a town that didn't want her, married to a man who could barely look at her. She didn't cry. She'd used up her tears somewhere around Bismarck. Instead, she stood, unpacked her bag with mechanical precision, and put water on for coffee. Survival first, survival. Everything else could wait. Caleb walked his rounds through a storm that could kill you if you let it. His boots broke through crusted snow with each step, and ice had already formed in his beard. The town was locked down tight, shutters closed, doors barred, only the saloon showing any life. He could hear singing from inside, off-key and loud. Probably Johnson and his crew, celebrating another week of not dying. He should check on the jail, make sure the stove was going, that the water hadn't frozen. Should stop by the general store, see if old man Patterson needed help securing his roof. Should do a lot of things. Instead, he stood in the middle of Main Street and stared back at his house. Light glowed in the window. She was in there. Eliza, his wife. He'd known what she looked like from the photograph she'd sent. Dark hair, serious eyes, a mouth that didn't smile much. But seeing her step off that train, half frozen and trying so hard to look brave, had hit him differently than he'd expected. She was younger than he'd thought, mid-20s maybe. Too young to be this desperate. But then, desperation didn't care about age. He'd been 26 when he'd buried Sarah. The cholera had taken her in 4 days. Fever, pain, gone. The baby had followed her 2 days later. A daughter he'd never gotten to name. That was 7 years ago. 7 years of keeping the law in a town too small and too cold for most lawmen to bother with. 7 years of empty rooms and frozen mornings and a loneliness that had stopped hurting because he'd stopped feeling it. Then the town council had started making noise. A marshal should have a wife, they said. Sets a good example. Shows stability. The fact that half of them were bachelors themselves didn't seem to matter. Politics never did. So he'd placed an advertisement. Been specific about terms. He needed someone practical. Someone who understood this wasn't about love or romance. Someone who could keep a house and not ask questions about the things he'd seen, the things he'd done. Eliza's letter had been different from the others. Most had been desperate or dreamy, women imagining frontier life as some kind of adventure. Eliza's had been honest. She'd told him about the scandal, about her brother's gambling debts, about the fact that she had no other options. She hadn't lied or prettied it up. He'd appreciated that. But now she was here, and the weight of what he'd done sat heavy in his chest. She was a real person, not just words on paper. She'd looked at him with those serious eyes and said, "I do." And now she was in his house, probably regretting every choice that had led her here. He should go back. Talk to her. Explain, explain what? That he was too broken for this to be anything but a transaction? That she'd married a ghost of a man who'd buried his heart with his wife and daughter? No. Better to keep it simple. Keep the distance. Let her understand exactly what this was. He turned away from the house and continued his rounds. The storm swallowed him whole. By the time Caleb returned, it was past midnight. Eliza was still awake, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the pages of a book she wasn't reading. She heard his boots on the step, the sound of him stamping off snow, the door opening. He looked half frozen. Ice clung to his coat, his beard, his eyebrows. He moved like a man whose body had stopped communicating with his brain, mechanical, stiff. "There's coffee," she said. "I'm fine." He wasn't fine. He could barely get his coat off. His fingers fumbled with the buttons, clumsy with cold. Eliza stood. "Sit down before you fall down." "I said I'm fine." "And I said sit." She didn't raise her voice, but something in her tone made him look at her. "You're half frozen and too stubborn to admit it. Sit. Down." For a moment she thought he'd argue. Then he sat heavily, like his legs had given up. She poured fresh coffee, added whiskey from a bottle on the shelf, and put it in his hands. "Drink." He did, and some of the tension left his shoulders. She went to the stove, heated water, found a towel. When she turned back, he was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Taking care of you. That's what wives do, isn't it? Even in business arrangements." She wrung out the towel and handed it to him. "Your face is ice. You'll get frostbite if you're not careful." He took the towel but didn't use it immediately, just held it, staring at the steam rising. "You didn't have to wait up," he said finally. "I wasn't waiting up. I couldn't sleep." "Town that quiet. You get used to it." "It's not the quiet." She sat across from him. "It's the noise in my head." That got a reaction, a flicker of something human in those guarded eyes. "You regretting this already?" "Are you?" The question hung between them. Outside, the storm rattled the windows. "I don't do regrets," Caleb said. "Waste of time." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." She should have been offended, should have pushed back. Instead, she found herself almost smiling. "You're going to be difficult, aren't you?" "Probably." "Good. I don't trust easy people." That surprised him. She could see it. He'd expected her to be soft, maybe, delicate, someone who'd break the first time he was blunt. He didn't know her at all. "Why'd you really come here, Didit?" he asked. "Your letter said scandal, but that covers a lot of ground." Eliza wrapped her hands around her own coffee cup. The heat felt good. "My brother gambled away our father's estate before the body was cold, borrowed money from men who don't accept apologies as payment. When they came looking for compensation, they looked at me." Caleb's jaw tightened. "They touch you?" "No, but they made it clear what they expected. I left before they could try." "The brother?" "Last I heard, he was heading to California, hoping to strike it rich and pay everyone back." She laughed, but it was bitter. "He won't. He never does. But he'll try, and he'll fail, and he'll find someone else to blame." "Family's supposed to take care of each other." "Supposed to. Doesn't always work that way." She met his eyes. "Why'd you really need a wife? You don't strike me as someone who cares what the town council thinks." His turn to hesitate. His fingers tightened around the cup. "I don't," he said finally. "But they control funding. They can replace me if they want, and there's—" He stopped. Started again. "There's things that need doing here. Things I can't do if I'm fighting them every step." "What kind of things?" "The kind that keep people alive through winter." It wasn't a full answer, but it was more than she'd expected. She could work with partial truths. She'd been doing it her whole life. "So we're both here because we had no better options," she said. "Seems like. And we're both planning to make the best of it." "That's the idea." She nodded. "Then I have one rule." He raised an eyebrow. "You making demands already?" "Not a demand. A rule. We don't lie to each other. We don't have to share everything. I understand privacy, but what we do say has to be true. Can you agree to that?" Caleb studied her for a long moment. She could see him weighing it, testing it against whatever walls he'd built. "I can agree to that," he said finally. "Good." She stood, took his empty cup. "Then you should sleep. You look like death." "Flattering?" "Honest. That's the rule, remember?" The corner of his mouth might have twitched. It was hard to tell under the beard. He stood, moved toward the curtain that divided the room. "Eliza." She turned. He was looking at her with something that wasn't quite gratitude, but wasn't far from it either. "Welcome to Hecla," he said. It wasn't much, but it was something. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of wind that sounded like the world ending. 3 days of snow piling so high against the door that Caleb had to dig them out each morning just to check the stove chimney. 3 days of being trapped in a room with a man who spoke in sentences shorter than most people's breaths. Eliza learned things in those 3 days. She learned that Caleb woke before dawn, moving quietly in the dark to stoke the fire. That he drank his coffee black and hot enough to scald. That he cleaned his rifle every morning with the precision of a man for whom it had meant the difference between living and dying. That he read, westerns mostly, dog-eared copies he'd read so many times the spines were broken. She learned that he didn't like talking before coffee, that he had nightmares sometimes, waking with a gasp and a hand reaching for the gun under his pillow. That he never mentioned them, just got up and stared out the window until dawn came. She learned that his first wife's name had been Sarah. He didn't tell her. She found the name carved into the bed frame, hidden where the mattress covered it. Sarah and Caleb, 1874, 8 years ago. A lifetime in frontier terms. She didn't ask about it. That would violate the unspoken agreement they'd developed. Proximity without intrusion, presence without pressure. On the third day, the storm broke. The wind died to nothing, and the silence was so complete it felt like the world had ended. Caleb stood at the window, staring out at a town buried in white. "I need to check on people," he said. "Some of the older folks. 3 days is a long time. I'll come with you." "You don't have to." "I know. I'm coming anyway." She'd expected him to argue. He didn't. Just nodded and started pulling on layers, shirt, vest, coat, a scarf wrapped around his face until only his eyes showed. The door opened onto a world transformed. Snow had drifted 6 feet high in places, sculpted by the wind into shapes that looked almost alive. The sky was hard and blue, the kind of blue that had no mercy in it. The cold hit like a physical blow. Eliza's breath froze in her lungs. She'd thought she understood cold. Boston winters could be brutal, but this was different. This was cold that wanted you dead, that would kill you if you gave it half a chance. "Stay close," Caleb said. "You get separated, you die. Simple as that." They moved down Main Street, or where Main Street should have been. It was hard to tell under all the white. The buildings looked like they'd been buried and excavated, roofs heavy with snow, drifts piled against doors and windows. Caleb stopped at the first house, a small cabin leaning like a drunk. He pounded on the door. "Patterson, you alive in there?" A long pause. Then shuffling sounds. The door cracked open, and an old man peered out, eyes rheumy and suspicious. "Who's asking?" "It's Rourke. Storm's over. You got enough wood?" "Got enough to get through the night. Maybe 2 if I'm careful. I'll send someone with more. You got food?" "Got beans. I'll have my wife bring you something better." Patterson's eyes shifted to Eliza. He looked her up and down with the kind of assessment that came from a lifetime of judging whether people would make it through winter. "That the mail-order bride?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "That's my wife, Mrs. Rourke." Something in his tone made Patterson's expression shift. "Well, welcome to Hecla, Mrs. Rourke. Hope you like snow." "It's growing on me," Eliza said. They moved on. House by house, cabin by cabin. Most people were fine, cold, hungry, tired of being trapped, but alive. A few needed help. A widow whose stove had gone out. A miner whose roof had partially collapsed. A family with 3 kids and no food left. Eliza watched Caleb work. He was different out here. Still gruff, still economical with words. But there was a care in how he checked on people, made sure they were safe. He wasn't just enforcing the law. He was keeping them alive. At the last house, a cabin barely standing on the edge of town, no one answered Caleb's knock. He tried again, harder. Mrs. Chen? You in there? Silence. Caleb's expression darkened. He tried the door. Locked. He stepped back, kicked it hard near the handle. The lock shattered, and the door swung open. The smell hit first, sick, sweet, and wrong. Then the cold, somehow colder than outside. Then the sight. A woman lay on the bed, wrapped in every blanket in the house, skin gray. Her eyes were closed. A child, couldn't have been more than 8, sat next to her, holding her hand, staring at them with dark eyes that had seen too much. "Mama won't wake up," the child said. Her voice was small, matter-of-fact. "I tried." Eliza moved before Caleb could. She went to the bed, pressed her fingers to the woman's neck. The skin was cold, but... "She's alive," Eliza said. "Barely. We need to get her warm. Now." Caleb was already moving. He scooped the woman up like she weighed nothing, blankets and all. "Get the child. We'll take them to our place." Eliza held out her hand. The little girl stared at it for a moment, then took it. Her fingers were ice. "What's your name?" Eliza asked as they hurried after Caleb. "May." "I'm Eliza. We're going to help your mother, May. She's going to be okay." She had no idea if that was true. But the child needed to hear it, so she said it. Getting back was harder with 2 extra bodies and a child stumbling through snowdrifts. By the time they reached the house, Eliza's lungs burned and her legs shook. Caleb kicked the door open and carried Mrs. Chen straight to the bed. "Strip her," he said. "Wet clothes will kill her faster than cold." They worked in tandem, peeling off layers of frozen fabric. Eliza had never undressed a stranger before, had never seen poverty this close. The woman's body was thin, bones pressing against skin. But there was no time for modesty or shock. They wrapped her in dry blankets, got the stove burning hot, heated water. May sat in the corner, watching with those 2 old eyes. "When did your mother get sick?" Eliza asked gently. 2 days ago. She said it was just cold, but then she couldn't get up." "What about your father?" "Dead. Mine accident. 6 months ago." 6 months. This woman had been alone with a child for 6 months, trying to survive on whatever she could manage, and she'd almost made it. It took hours. Hours of warming her slowly, spooning hot broth between her lips, rubbing circulation back into frozen fingers and toes. Caleb sent word to the doctor, a man who was more drunk than sober most days, but knew his trade. He came, examined her, gave instructions. "Pneumonia," he said. "Maybe worse. Keep her warm. Keep her hydrated. If she makes it through the night, she's got a chance." By nightfall, Mrs. Chen's color had improved slightly. Her breathing was rough but steady. She hadn't woken, but she was alive. May had fallen asleep in the chair, head tipped back, mouth open. She looked impossibly small. "What happens to them?" Eliza asked quietly. Caleb was standing by the window, staring out at the dark. "If she lives, they'll need help getting through winter. If she doesn't..." "If she doesn't?" "The church usually takes orphans, finds them homes, or they go to family if there's any." "And if there's no family?" "Then they go wherever they can." Eliza looked at the child sleeping in the chair, 8 years old and already familiar with loss. What kind of place was this, where children learn to accept death like it was weather? "This town is dying, isn't it?" she said. Caleb didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet. "It's trying real hard. Can it be saved? Don't know, but I'm going to keep trying until it can't." She understood then what drove him. It wasn't duty or stubbornness. It was the same thing that had made him carry Mrs. Chen through the snow, the same thing that had made him check on Old Man Patterson, the same thing that kept him walking rounds through storms that could kill. He'd lost something, someone, and he was damned if he'd lose anything else. "I'll help," Eliza said. He turned to look at her. "You don't know what you're signing up for." "No, but I'll learn." For the first time since she'd arrived, something like respect crossed his face. "You're tougher than you look." "I'd better be." "I married you, didn't I?" The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close enough. Mrs. Chen woke 3 days later. Weak, confused, but alive. The first thing she did was reach for her daughter. The second was try to apologize to Eliza for the inconvenience. "You saved my life," she said, her voice raw. I have no way to repay. You don't owe me anything, Eliza interrupted. You just need to get well. But Mrs. Chen shook her head. I owe you everything. In my culture, that is a debt of honor. Eliza didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and brought her more soup. When they were strong enough, Caleb helped them back to their cabin. He'd had men repair the roof, stock the wood, leave food. Mrs. Chen cried when she saw it. Why? She asked. Why help us? Caleb looked uncomfortable with the question. It's what you do, he said gruffly. But Eliza was starting to understand that it wasn't what everyone did. It was what he did, in a place where kindness was expensive and help was rare. Word of what happened spread through Hekla like smoke. By the end of the week, everyone knew that the marshal's new wife had helped save the Chen woman. Some were impressed. Others were suspicious. She's trying too hard, Eliza overheard in the general store. Wants us to like her. Or she's actually decent, another voice said. Wouldn't kill you to give her a chance, Martha. Eliza pretended not to hear. She was learning the rhythms of the town, who to trust, who to avoid, how to navigate the politics of a place where everyone knew everyone's business. It was different from Boston society, but not as different as she'd expected. People were people, whether they wore silk or buckskin. She also learned that Caleb had been right about the town council. 3 men who fancied themselves important, Harrison, who owned the saloon, Whitmore, who ran the general store, and Davies, who had the biggest ranch in the territory. They met once a week in the back of the saloon, drinking Harrison's whiskey and making decisions that affected everyone. Caleb hated them. He never said so directly, but Eliza could read it in the set of his jaw when they cornered him after church, in the way his hands clenched when they made suggestions about how he should do his job. They're idiots, he told her one night. Rich idiots who think money makes them smart. Can they really replace you? They can try. Would need the territorial governor to approve it, but if they make enough noise... He shrugged. It's happened before. So you play along. For now, until I don't have to. It was a dangerous game, and Eliza could see the strain it put on him, but she also saw that he was good at it, better than he probably realized. He knew how to give them just enough respect to keep them happy while doing exactly what he wanted anyway. She was learning from him, watching how he navigated power, how he protected the people who couldn't protect themselves. It wasn't noble or romantic. It was practical, pragmatic, and absolutely necessary. 2 weeks after the storm, trouble came. It started at the mining camp 5 miles north of town. Men poured into Hekla in the evening, 30, maybe 40 of them, hungry and angry. They'd been working claims that hadn't paid out, living on promises and dwindling supplies. Winter had trapped them. They were desperate. Caleb met them in the street, rifle in hand but pointed at the ground. Eliza watched from the window of their house, heart pounding. What do you want? Caleb's voice carried in the cold air. A big man stepped forward, someone Eliza didn't recognize. We want food. We want supplies. We've been working ourselves to death while you town folks sit warm and fed. You've been working for wages. That's the deal you made. Wages don't mean shit when there's nothing to buy. Whitmore's charging double for flour, triple for meat. We're starving while he gets rich. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. They weren't armed, but they didn't need to be. 40 desperate men could tear the town apart with their bare hands. Whitmore sets his own prices, Caleb said. That's his right. And it's our right to take what we need. The crowd surged forward. Caleb didn't move, didn't raise the rifle, just stood there, a wall of 1 against 40. You do that, he said quietly, and I'll put every one of you in the ground before sunrise. That what you want? The big man hesitated. The crowd shifted, uncertain. We just want to eat, someone called from the back. Then work for it. Legal work. I'll talk to the merchants, see about getting prices down. But you start stealing, you start breaking into stores, and this gets bloody. Nobody wants that. It was a standoff, the kind that could tip either way. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and it would explode. Eliza made a decision. She stepped out of the house and walked toward Caleb. She heard him curse under his breath, but she didn't stop. Mrs. Rourke, the big man said, this ain't your business. It is if you're planning to tear apart my town. She looked at the crowd, really looked. They were thin, exhausted, desperate, not criminals, just men who'd run out of options. You're hungry, I understand, but destroying what's here won't feed you. It'll just make everyone hungry. So what do we do? Someone asked. Starve, pretty? No, you work, real work, fixing roofs, clearing snow, helping people who can't help themselves. The town pays you in food and supplies, not charity, labor. The idea hung in the air. Several men looked interested, others skeptical. Who decides what's fair? The big man asked. Eliza looked at Caleb. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, or something sharper. We all do, she said. The council, the merchants, the workers. We figure out what's fair and we stick to it. But it has to be legal, has to be organized. Otherwise it's just chaos, and chaos gets people killed. The crowd muttered among themselves. The tension was still there, but it had shifted, from anger to something more like hope. I'll talk to the council, Caleb said. His voice was steady, authoritative. Meeting tomorrow morning. We'll work something out. And if they say no? The big man asked. Then I'll make them say yes. There was something in his tone that made it clear this wasn't a negotiation. The crowd seemed to understand that. Slowly they began to disperse, heading back toward the camp or into the saloon. When they were gone, Caleb turned to Eliza. She braced herself for anger. She'd overstepped, interfered with his job. Instead, he said, "That was either brilliant or insane. Can it be both?" "Probably." He looked at her for a long moment. "You just committed me to fighting the council on their own turf." "Can you win?" "Don't know, but I guess we're about to find out." For the first time since she'd arrived, she felt like they were really partners. Not just two people sharing a house, but two people working toward the same thing. It was terrifying, and it felt right. The council meeting was a war dressed up as politics. Harrison, Whitmore, and Davies sat on one side of the table, Caleb and Eliza on the other. The room was thick with cigar smoke and suspicion. "This is a terrible idea," Whitmore said flatly. "You want us to pay miners to do work we don't need done? You need your roof fixed?" Caleb interrupted. "Because I saw 3 leaks last week. And Davies, your fence line's falling apart. Harrison, your saloon's got a busted step that's going to break someone's neck." "We can hire people to fix those things," Davies said. "Who?" "Everyone with skills is either working claims or already employed. You've got 40 men sitting in a camp with nothing to do. Put them to work." "And pay them with our inventory?" Whitmore's face was red. "That's charity. I'm not running a charity." "It's trade," Eliza said. "They work. You pay them in goods at cost. You're not losing money. You're moving inventory you couldn't sell anyway at prices nobody can afford." "At cost?" Whitmore looked like she'd suggested he set himself on fire. "I have overhead expenses. You have a town full of starving people who are one bad day away from burning your store down," Caleb said. "You want to talk overhead or you want to talk survival?" The room went quiet. It was the kind of truth that cut through bullshit like a knife. Davies leaned back in his chair. "Let's say we agree. Who decides who works? Who makes sure they actually do the job?" "I do," Caleb said. "I assign work, oversee it, make sure it's done right. Anyone doesn't pull their weight, they don't eat. Simple as that." "And what's to stop them from demanding more? From getting used to handouts?" "It's not handouts," Eliza repeated. "It's labor. Honest labor for honest pay. We put a time limit on it, say, until spring thaw. By then, the claims will be workable again, or the men will move on. But for now, we keep them fed and we keep them working." Harrison smoked his cigar, considering. "What's in this for you, Marshall? Why do you care if a bunch of miners starve?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "Because I'm tired of burying people." The weight of that statement settled over the room. These men had lived here long enough to know what he meant. They'd seen the graves, the bodies, the slow attrition of a town bleeding people. "1 month," Davies said finally. "We try this for 1 month. If it works, we talk about extending it. If it doesn't, we're done. Agreed?" Whitmore looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded reluctantly. Harrison did the same. "Agreed," Caleb said. They shook on it, hands gripping hard, like men making a deal they didn't quite trust. When they left the saloon, the sun was setting, turning the snow orange and pink. Eliza felt exhausted and exhilarated at the same time. "Do you think it'll work?" she asked. "Don't know," Caleb said, "but at least we bought time." Time. In a place like this, that was everything. As they walked home, Caleb said quietly, "You didn't have to do that. Back there with the crowd. It was my job." "I know, but you looked like you could use help." "I'm not used to help." "You better get used to it. You're stuck with me now." He almost smiled. "Yeah, I guess I am." It wasn't love. It wasn't even friendship yet. But it was something, and in the middle of a Montana winter in a town fighting for its life, something was better than nothing. They'd taken a gamble. Now they had to see if it paid off. And Eliza had a feeling this was just the beginning. The first day of the work program started with a fight. Two miners showed up at the general store at dawn, claiming they'd been assigned the same roof repair job. Whitmore stood behind his counter with his arms crossed, looking like a man who'd rather watch them kill each other than sort it out. Caleb arrived before the first punch landed, stepping between them with the kind of presence that made grown men reconsider their choices. "Johnson, you're on the store roof. McCready, you're helping Old Man Patterson with his wood pile. You got a problem with that? Take it up with me after you've done 8 hours of work." Neither man argued. They just took their assignments and left, shooting each other dirty looks as they went. Eliza watched from across the street, holding a basket of bread she'd baked before sunrise. She'd learned quickly that in a town this size, feeding people was as much politics as kindness. The miners needed to see that the work program wasn't just labor. It was investment in keeping everyone alive. "You're up early." Caleb's voice startled her. She hadn't heard him approach. "Couldn't sleep. Figured I'd make myself useful." He looked at the basket. "That for the workers?" "Thought they might appreciate it, first day and all." Something shifted in his expression, not quite approval, but close. "They will. Most of them haven't had fresh bread in months." She started toward the work sites, but he caught her arm. His hand was warm even through her coat sleeve. "Be careful," he said. "Some of these men, they're grateful, but desperate men don't always show it the right way." "I can handle myself." "I know, just be careful anyway." She nodded and he let her go, but she felt his eyes on her back as she walked away. The work sites were scattered across town. Men hammered shingles onto roofs, chopped wood, cleared snow from pathways. The sound of labor filled the cold air, a sound Hecla hadn't heard in weeks. Eliza moved between them, offering bread, learning names, listening to their stories. Most were from back east, same as her. Men who'd come west chasing promises of gold and found only frozen ground and empty pockets. A few had families waiting in other towns, sending money when they could. Others had nobody, nothing except the clothes on their backs and the hope that spring would change their luck. "You're the marshal's wife," one man said. He was young, couldn't have been more than 20, with hands already scarred from mining work. "Eliza," she corrected. "Right, Eliza." He took a piece of bread, held it like it was precious. "This was your idea, wasn't it? The work program." "It was everyone's idea. I just said it out loud." "Well, you saved some lives saying it, mine included." He looked embarrassed suddenly, like he'd shared too much. "Just wanted you to know that. We ain't all troublemakers. I never thought you were." She meant it. Looking at these men, cold, tired, doing honest work for honest pay, she saw the same thing she'd seen in herself when she stepped off that train. People trying to survive the only way they knew how. By midday, the town had transformed. Roofs were patched, wood piles were stacked, pathways were cleared. It wasn't perfect. Some work was sloppy, and a few men spent more time complaining than working. But it was progress. Real, visible progress. Whitmore stood in his doorway, watching his newly repaired roof with the expression of a man who'd just swallowed something bitter, but necessary. "I suppose it'll hold through winter," he muttered when Eliza passed. "It will. Those men know what they're doing." He went back inside without another word, but she caught him sneaking glances at the workers through his window. That evening, Caleb paid out the first wages. Flour, beans, salt pork, coffee. The miners lined up outside the general store like it was Christmas. Some of them had tears in their eyes when they walked away with full sacks. 1 month, Whitmore reminded Caleb as they settled accounts. That was the deal. I remember. And if this goes wrong, it won't. But Eliza heard the uncertainty under his confidence. This was a gamble, and the stakes were higher than anyone wanted to admit. If the work program failed, the miners would riot. If it succeeded too well, the merchants would resent the loss of profit. Either way, someone would be angry. Caleb locked up the store and walked her home through the dark. The temperature had dropped with the sun, it always did, and their breath formed clouds that hung in the air like ghosts. You think we bought enough time? Eliza asked. For what? For whatever comes next. He was quiet for a moment. I don't know. But I know we can't go back now. We've shown them there's another way. Whether they take it or burn it down, that's up to them. It wasn't reassuring, but it was honest, and honesty was the rule they'd agreed to. Inside their house, she was starting to think of it as theirs, not just his. The fire was low. Caleb rebuilt it while she made coffee. They'd fallen into routines without discussing them, each taking on tasks that needed doing. He handled the physical labor, she managed the details. It worked, mostly. Mrs. Chen stopped by while you were doing rounds, Eliza said. She wanted to thank you again. She doesn't need to keep thanking me. Try telling her that. I think she's going to keep showing up until you accept it. Accept what? That you did something good. That you saved her life and her daughter's life, and that matters. Caleb stared into his coffee like it held answers. I've saved lives before. Lost more than I've saved. Doesn't balance out. It's not supposed to balance. That's not how it works. Then how does it work? She didn't have an answer for that. Back east, she'd been taught that good deeds were their own reward, that virtue was its own currency. But out here, virtue got you frozen or starved or shot. Survival was the only currency that mattered, and even that wasn't always enough. I don't know, she admitted, but I think you keep trying anyway, because what's the alternative? He looked at her then, really looked at her. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone softer, someone who'd break the first time things got hard. Sorry to disappoint. You didn't. He set his cup down. You did the opposite. It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd given her. She felt warmth spread through her chest, and it had nothing to do with the coffee. Well, she said, trying to keep her voice light, you're stuck with me now. Better get used to it. I'm starting to. That night she lay in bed listening to him breathe on the other side of the curtain. He'd insisted on keeping the division between them, sleeping on the floor even though she'd told him a dozen times it was unnecessary. Stubborn man. Stubborn, honorable, complicated man. She wondered what Sarah had been like. If she'd been soft where Eliza was hard, if she'd known how to reach the parts of Caleb that he kept locked away, if she'd loved him, or if their marriage had been a transaction too. The questions felt invasive even in her own head, but she couldn't stop thinking them. Outside, the wind picked up. It rattled the windows and found gaps in the walls, bringing the cold inside no matter how well they sealed things. Winter wasn't done with them yet. Not by a long shot. The second week of the work program brought new problems. A merchant from a neighboring town showed up, took one look at the miners working for food, and immediately dropped his prices. Why pay Whitmore's inflated rates when you could hire desperate men for half the cost? Other merchants followed. Within days, Hecla's merchants were in a price war they couldn't afford to lose. Whitmore stormed into the marshal's office, red-faced and furious. "This is your fault," he shouted at Caleb. "You and your damn work program. Now I've got competition I can't match, and I'm losing business." Caleb didn't look up from the paperwork he was filing. "You were overcharging. Market corrected itself." "Market corrected? I've got overhead. I've got expenses. I can't run a business on charity prices." "Then adapt." "Adapt?" Whitmore's voice went up an octave. "To what? Bankruptcy?" Eliza had been organizing supplies in the back room, but she stepped out now. "Maybe you need to change what you're selling." Both men turned to look at her. "Excuse me?" Whitmore said. "You're competing on price for basic goods. Flour, beans, tools. You'll always lose that fight because there's always someone willing to go cheaper. But what about specialty items? Things people want but can't get anywhere else?" "Like what?" tobacco, whiskey, fabric, books, luxuries. The miners are making money now. They'll spend it on things that make life bearable, not just survivable. Whitmore's expression shifted from anger to calculation. And where am I supposed to get these luxuries? Order them. You've got connections back east, don't you? Bring in things nobody else has and charge whatever you want. People will pay. It was a risk. She was essentially telling him to invest money he might not have in goods that might not sell. But she could see him turning it over in his mind, looking for the angle, the profit. I'd need capital, he said finally. Then find investors. Or talk to the other merchants. Pool your resources. Caleb was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. She'd overstepped again. This wasn't her business, wasn't her fight. But she couldn't help herself. Problem-solving had always been her strength, even when nobody asked for her help. Whitmore left without another word, but she could see the wheels turning. He'd consider it, maybe not today, but eventually. You trying to run this town? Caleb asked when they were alone. No, just trying to keep it from tearing itself apart. That's my job. I know, I'm just helping. He leaned back against the desk, arms crossed. You're doing more than helping. You're changing things. Is that bad? Don't know yet. Ask me in a month. But there was something in his voice that wasn't quite disapproval. Maybe respect. Maybe something else. The turning point came 3 weeks into the program. A miner named Sullivan, big, loud, with a reputation for trouble, refused to work. Said the program was exploitation dressed up as charity, that they were being used like slaves while the merchants got rich. We should take what we need, he told a gathering crowd at the mining camp, not beg for scraps like dogs. Caleb heard about it within an hour. He showed up at the camp alone, which Eliza later told him was either brave or stupid. Probably both, he admitted. Sullivan stood in the center of the crowd, arms crossed, chin jutting out like he was daring Caleb to disagree. You got a complaint, Sullivan? You bring it to me. You don't rile up the camp. Why? You afraid we might realize we outnumber you? No, I'm afraid you might do something dumb and get people killed. The crowd shifted. Some men looked uncertain. Others looked ready for a fight. We're tired of working for table scraps, Sullivan said. We want real wages, cash money. Then go find real work. There's claims opening up north, ranches hiring south. You want cash, earn it somewhere that pays cash? And freeze to death traveling? No thanks. We want what's ours. What's yours is what you work for, that's the deal. You don't like it? Leave. Sullivan stepped forward. He was bigger than Caleb, broader, and he knew it. Maybe we don't want to leave. Maybe we want to stay and take what we deserve. Caleb didn't move, didn't reach for his gun, just stood there, calm as stone. You try that, and I'll put you in the ground, he said quietly. Not because I want to, because that's the law. And the law is the only thing keeping this town from becoming a slaughterhouse. You want to test that? Go ahead. But understand, I don't miss. The silence stretched. Eliza, watching from a distance, held her breath. One wrong move, one misstep, and this would explode. Then a voice from the crowd. Sullivan's full of shit. It was the young miner who'd thanked Eliza for the bread. He stepped forward, looking nervous but determined. We got food now, we got work. It ain't perfect, but it's better than starving. You want to throw that away because you're too proud to accept help? That's your business, but don't drag the rest of us into it. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Sullivan's face reddened, but he didn't have a response. The moment had shifted, and he knew it. This ain't over, he muttered. Yeah, it is, Caleb said. You're done here. Pack your things and leave. Tonight. You can't. I just did. You've got until sunrise. Sullivan looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Caleb's eyes made him reconsider. He spat on the ground and walked away, pushing through the crowd. Caleb waited until he was gone, then turned to the rest of the miners. Anyone else got complaints? Bring them to me. We'll talk it through like adults. But if you're looking to start trouble, take it somewhere else. We clear? The miners nodded. The young one who'd spoken up caught Caleb's eye and nodded back. When Caleb returned to town, Eliza was waiting. You could have gotten yourself killed, she said. Could have, didn't. That's not the point. Then what is the point? The point is, you don't have to do everything alone. You've got people who'll back you up. Use them. He looked at her for a long moment. I'm not used to relying on people. I noticed, but you married me, so you're stuck with at least one person, whether you like it or not. I'm starting to like it, he said quietly. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. This wasn't about the work program anymore, wasn't about politics or survival. This was something else, something neither of them knew how to name. Good, Eliza said finally, because I'm not going anywhere. That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, Caleb didn't sleep on the floor. They didn't discuss it, didn't make it a thing. He just pulled back the blanket and lay down beside her, leaving space between them but sharing the warmth. Eliza stared at the ceiling, hyper-aware of his presence. She could hear his breathing, feel the heat radiating from his body. It wasn't intimate, not really, but it felt significant in a way she couldn't quite articulate. Sarah and I met during a cattle drive, Caleb said suddenly. His voice was low, rough. She was a cook for one of the ranches. Prettiest thing I'd ever seen. Knew right away I was going to marry her. Eliza didn't move, didn't speak. This was the first time he'd talked about his first wife without being asked. We had 3 good years. Then the cholera came through. Took her and the baby both. I couldn't... He stopped. Started again. I couldn't save them. Tried everything. Nothing worked. I'm sorry, Eliza whispered. Don't be. It was a long time ago. That doesn't make it hurt less. He was quiet for a moment. No, I guess it doesn't. She wanted to reach for him, to offer comfort in the only way she knew how. But something told her that wasn't what he needed. So she just lay there, present, listening. I told myself I wouldn't do this again, he said. Wouldn't let anyone close enough to hurt me like that. But then you showed up and you're not what I expected. You said that before. Because it's true. I thought I could keep this simple. Keep it transactional. But you won't let me. Is that a complaint? No, it's just, I don't know what to do with it. Eliza rolled onto her side, facing him in the dark. She couldn't see his expression, but she could feel the tension radiating from him. You don't have to do anything, she said. We're partners. That's enough for now. And later? Later can take care of itself. He reached out then, his hand finding hers in the dark. His fingers were rough, calloused from years of hard work. She squeezed back. They fell asleep like that, hands linked, the distance between them shrinking without either of them noticing. The work program lasted exactly 1 month, as promised. By the end, the town had been transformed. Roofs were solid, woodpiles were stocked, pathways were clear. The merchants had adapted, bringing in specialty goods that sold faster than they could restock them. The miners had money in their pockets and food in their bellies. And nobody had died. The council met to discuss extending the program. Davies argued for making it permanent, at least until spring. Harrison agreed. Whitmore, surprisingly, didn't object. It's been profitable, he admitted reluctantly. More than I expected. Caleb leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. So we're agreed? The program continues? All 3 men nodded. Then I want something in return, Caleb said. Davies raised an eyebrow. What? A school. The kids in this town have been running wild for 2 years. They need education, structure, and my wife's qualified to teach them. All eyes turned to Eliza. She kept her face neutral, even though her heart was racing. They hadn't discussed this. He was just giving her this, offering her a purpose beyond survival. A school costs money, Whitmore said. So does chaos. You want these kids growing up illiterate and useless, or you want them educated enough to actually contribute? The logic was sound, and the merchants knew it. After a brief discussion, they agreed. The church building could be used during weekdays. Eliza would be paid in supplies and a small stipend. Walking home after the meeting, Eliza felt lighter than she had in months. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know. Why did you? Caleb shrugged. You're good at solving problems. Figured you should get paid for it. That's not the real reason. He glanced at her. No. The real reason is you deserve something that's yours. Something that isn't about me or this town or anything else. Just yours. She stopped walking. He stopped too, turning to face her. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet. Half those kids are feral. You'll earn every penny. But he was smiling when he said it. A real smile. Not the half grimace he usually offered. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. She kissed him. Not a deep kiss. Not passionate. Just a quick press of lips to his cheek, spontaneous and unplanned. His hand came up to where she'd kissed him, touching the spot like he was confirming it had happened. What was that for, Ta? He asked. For being a good man, even when you try not to be. He didn't have a response to that. Just stood there in the middle of the frozen street, looking at her like he was seeing something he'd lost and found again. The school opened 2 weeks later. 12 children showed up the first day, ranging from 6 to 14, all of them with varying levels of literacy and discipline. Eliza had her work cut out for her. She started with basics, reading, writing, arithmetic, but she also taught them about the world beyond Hekla, about history and geography, and the idea that they could be more than miners or ranchers if they wanted. Mei Chen was her best student. The girl absorbed knowledge like a sponge, always asking questions, always wanting to know more. Her mother still thanked Eliza every time they passed on the street, and Eliza had stopped trying to deflect it. One afternoon, a boy named Tommy, 10 years old and already hard as nails, asked, "What's the point of learning this stuff? We're just going to work the mines anyway." "Maybe," Eliza said, "or maybe you'll do something else. The point of learning isn't just about getting a job, it's about having choices." "What choices do we got? We're stuck here." "For now, but you won't be stuck forever. And when you leave, if you leave, you'll need to know how to navigate the world. That's what this gives you." Tommy didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue either. Small victories. Teaching was harder than Eliza had expected, but also more rewarding. These children were rough around the edges, suspicious of authority, used to taking care of themselves. But underneath the toughness, they were just kids. Kids who wanted to learn, even if they didn't know how to show it. At night, she'd tell Caleb about her day, who'd made progress, who'd caused trouble, what small triumphs she'd achieved. He'd listen, sometimes offering advice, sometimes just nodding. But she could tell he was proud of her, even if he didn't say it directly. Their relationship had shifted without them quite acknowledging it. They touched more often now, a hand on the shoulder, fingers brushing when they passed each other. They talked about things that mattered, not just logistics and survival. They laughed sometimes, at stupid jokes or shared observations. It felt like a marriage, not the kind she'd imagined as a girl, full of romance and grand gestures, but something real, built on trust and partnership and the slow accumulation of shared moments. One night, lying in bed beside him, she said, "I'm glad I came here." Caleb turned to look at her. "Yeah?" "Yeah, it's hard and it's cold, and sometimes I wonder what the hell I was thinking, but I'm glad." "Me too." "Really? Really? You changed things here, Eliza. Made them better. Made me—" He paused, searching for words. "Made me remember what it's like to care about something beyond just surviving." She reached for his hand, laced her fingers through his. "We make a good team." "We do." He kissed her then, not on the cheek, not tentative. A real kiss, deep and searching, tasting like coffee and something warmer. She kissed him back, her hand finding the nape of his neck, pulling him closer. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "This wasn't the deal," he said. "No, it wasn't." "You regret it?" "Not even a little." They made love that night for the first time, slow and careful, learning each other's bodies in the dark. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about their relationship was perfect. But it was real and honest, and when Eliza fell asleep in his arms afterward, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. Not just physically, but emotionally. Like she'd finally found the place she was supposed to be. Winter loosened its grip gradually. The storms came less frequently. The temperature climbed above freezing during the day, turning snow to slush. Spring wasn't here yet, but it was coming, and with it, new challenges, new choices, new possibilities. But for now, Eliza and Caleb stood together in the house they'd made a home, facing whatever came next the way they'd faced everything else. Together. Spring arrived like a broken promise. The snow melted into mud that swallowed boots whole, and the roads turned into rivers of freezing slush that made travel nearly impossible. The miners who'd stayed through winter packed their gear and headed back to the claims, optimistic that the thaw would reveal fortunes they'd missed before. Most would be disappointed, but hope was cheap and easier to carry than cynicism. Eliza stood at the schoolhouse window, watching them go. 12 weeks of teaching had left her exhausted and oddly satisfied. Some of the children had learned to read full sentences. Others could do basic arithmetic. Tommy had stopped asking what the point was and started asking how things worked instead. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. "They'll be back when winter comes," Mrs. Chen said from behind her. She'd started helping at the school, teaching the children basic sewing and cooking skills. The mines never pay what they promise. "Will you be here?" Mrs. Chen smiled. "Where else would I go? Hekla is home now." Home. The word still felt strange to Eliza, but less strange than it had 4 months ago. She had a husband who loved her, though he'd only said the words once, late at night, like admitting to a crime. She had work that mattered. She had a place in this town that she'd carved out with her own hands. But she also had something she hadn't told anyone yet, something that made her stomach flutter with equal parts terror and anticipation. She was pregnant. She'd known for 3 weeks, ever since she'd missed her monthly bleeding and started waking up nauseous. She'd seen enough pregnant women to recognize the signs, but she'd been afraid to believe it, afraid to hope. Now, watching the miners leave and feeling the subtle changes in her body, she couldn't deny it anymore. She needed to tell Caleb. Tonight. The thought made her hands shake. When school ended, she walked home through the mud, her skirts heavy and filthy by the time she reached the door. Caleb was already there, cleaning his rifle at the table. He looked up when she entered, and his expression softened. "You look like you fought the mud and lost." The mud definitely won. She hung her coat, kicked off her boots. "How were rounds?" "Quiet. Sullivan showed up drunk at the saloon, started talking about how we ran him out of town unfairly. Harrison threw him out before I even got there." "Good." "Yeah." He set the rifle aside. "Something's bothering you." It wasn't a question. He'd gotten good at reading her moods, knowing when she was troubled, even when she tried to hide it. "We need to talk," she said. His expression shifted, not fear exactly, but wariness. "That sounds serious." "It is, but it's not bad. At least, I don't think it's bad." She sat across from him, hands clasped on the table. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought he might hear it. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Caleb went very still, his face unreadable. "You're sure?" he asked finally. "Pretty sure. All the signs are there." He stood abruptly, turned away. For a moment she thought he was going to leave, just walk out without another word. But he stayed, hands braced on the edge of the table, head down. "Caleb? I need a minute." She waited, her stomach churning. This wasn't the reaction she'd hoped for, but it wasn't unexpected either. He'd lost a child before. This had to be bringing back memories he'd rather forget. When he finally turned back, his eyes were wet. Not crying, but close. "Sarah was pregnant when she died," he said quietly. 8 months. We were going to name her Catherine. I'd already built a cradle, carved her name into it. He wiped his face roughly. "When they died, I burned it. Couldn't stand looking at it." "I'm sorry. I know this is—" "Don't apologize." He crossed to her, pulled her to her feet, wrapped his arms around her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Don't you dare apologize. This is everything." She felt his chest hitch against her, felt the dampness of tears on her hair. She held him back just as tightly, letting him have this moment. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "I don't know if I can do this again, if I can watch you go through pregnancy, watch you give birth knowing what can go wrong." "I'm terrified too, but we'll do it together." He pulled back enough to look at her. "You really want this?" "Yes. Do you?" "Yes. More than I thought possible." He kissed her then, and it tasted like salt and relief, and something that felt dangerously close to joy. The pregnancy changed things. Caleb became simultaneously more protective and more anxious. He insisted she stop walking to school alone, started checking on her multiple times a day, hovered until she threatened to lock him out of the house. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she told him after he'd interrupted her lessons for the third time in one morning. "I know. I know what you're doing and I appreciate it, but you need to trust that I'll be careful, that I'll ask for help if I need it." He looked miserable. "I don't know how to not worry." "Then worry, but do it quietly and at a distance." That got a reluctant smile from him. "Yes, ma'am." The town found out within a week. Hecla was too small for secrets. The women started bringing her things, advice, mostly unwanted, remedies that sounded more dangerous than helpful, hand-me-down baby clothes that had seen better days. Mrs. Chen gave her ginger root for the nausea and taught her breathing exercises that actually helped. "My mother taught me," she said. "Old Chinese wisdom. Works better than any medicine." The men treated her differently too. They tipped their hats more often, moved out of her way on the street, spoke more carefully around her. It was simultaneously annoying and touching. But with the celebration came complications. Davies called a council meeting 6 weeks after Eliza had told Caleb. She wasn't invited, but she showed up anyway, standing in the back while the men discussed town business. "The marshal's situation has changed," Davies said, not looking at Caleb. "He's going to be a father. That brings responsibilities." "I'm aware of my responsibilities," Caleb said coldly. "Of course, but a family man needs stability, security. The marshal's position doesn't pay enough to support a wife and child properly. I manage fine. For now. But what about when the baby comes? What about medical care? What if there are complications?" Eliza saw where this was going before Caleb did. This wasn't about his welfare. This was about control. "What are you suggesting?" Caleb asked. "We're suggesting a partnership," Harrison interjected. "You continue as marshal, but you also take on other work. Security for the saloon, protection for merchant shipments, that sort of thing. We'd pay you well." "Very well. You want me to be your private enforcer. We want to ensure you're adequately compensated for your skills." Caleb's laugh was bitter. "You want me compromised. If I'm working for you directly, I can't enforce the law fairly, can't make decisions that might hurt your businesses." "That's a cynical interpretation," Davies said. "It's an accurate one." Whitmore leaned forward. "Marshal, be reasonable. You have a child coming. Pride doesn't feed babies. Take the offer." "No." The word fell like a hammer. The council members exchanged glances. "You're making a mistake," Davies said. "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." Eliza felt a surge of pride and terror. He was standing his ground, but he was also making enemies, powerful enemies. After the meeting, they walked home in tense silence. "They're going to try to replace you," Eliza said finally. "I know." "What are we going to do?" "I don't know, but I'm not working for them. The second I do that, I lose any authority I have. The law becomes whoever pays me the most." She understood his position. She even agreed with it. But practicality gnawed at her. They did need money. They did need security. Principle was important, but so was survival. "There has to be another way," she said. "If there is, I haven't found it yet." That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay beside Caleb, listening to his breathing, her mind racing through possibilities. The council had leverage now, his family, his future. They'd use it to bend him to their will, slowly but surely, unless she found a way to change the equation. The idea came to her around midnight, fully formed and slightly insane. She turned it over in her mind, looking for flaws, finding plenty but also finding a path forward. In the morning, she told Caleb she was going to the general store. Instead, she went to see Davies at his ranch. The ranch was impressive by frontier standards. A main house with glass windows, multiple outbuildings, fenced pastures that stretched to the horizon. Davies himself answered the door, surprise flickering across his face. "Mrs. Rourke, this is unexpected. I need to speak with you, privately." He led her to a study lined with books he probably hadn't read and offered her tea she didn't want. They sat across from each other, the desk between them like a battlefield. "What can I do for you?" Davies asked. "You can stop trying to buy my husband." His expression didn't change. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. The job offer, the concern about stability, it's all leverage. You want him dependent on you so you can control how he enforces the law. That's quite an accusation. It's quite an accurate one. She leaned forward. But I'm not here to argue about your motives. I'm here to offer an alternative. That got his attention. What kind of alternative? You're worried about profits, about competition, about maintaining control of this town's economy. I can help with that. How? I know how merchants think. I grew up around them back east, watched my father navigate business politics for 30 years. You're competing against each other when you should be cooperating. If you formed a merchant association, pooled resources, coordinated prices, presented a united front, you'd have more power than you do individually. Davies studied her. And what would you get out of this? You leave my husband alone. Let him do his job without interference. In exchange, I'll help organize the merchants, smooth over disputes, find efficiencies that benefit everyone. You want to be a mediator. I want to be useful, and I want my husband to keep his integrity intact. Davies was quiet for a long moment. She could see him calculating, weighing the benefits against the risks. The council would need to approve this, he said finally. So convince them. You're good at that. A smile ghosted across his face. You're more like your husband than I thought. Stubborn, principled, probably too smart for your own good. Is that a yes? It's a maybe. I'll discuss it with Harrison and Whitmore. If they agree, we'll draw up terms. Fair enough? She stood to leave, but Davies stopped her. Mrs. Rourke, your husband is a good man. Rare thing out here. But good men don't always survive. You might want to remember that. He'll survive, Eliza said, because he's not doing it alone anymore. When she told Caleb what she'd done, he was furious. You went behind my back? I went around your stubbornness. There's a difference. You could have made things worse, or I could have made them better. We won't know until we try. He paced the room, hands clenched. You can't just negotiate with these people like they're reasonable. They're sharks. They'll take what you're offering and demand more. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But doing nothing wasn't working either. He stopped pacing, turned to face her. I don't want you fighting my battles. Too bad. We're married. Your battles are my battles. That's exactly how it works. She stood, moved close enough to touch him. You protected me when I arrived. You gave me work, purpose, a home. Now it's my turn to protect you. Let me. His jaw worked, emotions flickering across his face too fast to identify. Finally, he pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. You're going to drive me crazy, he muttered. Probably. But you'll survive it. Will I? We both will. Together. The council agreed to Eliza's proposal 2 weeks later, with conditions. She would mediate merchant disputes and help organize cooperative ventures, but she would have no official authority. Any decisions would still go through the council for final approval. It was less than she'd hoped for, but more than she'd expected. The first meeting of the Merchant Association was tense. 6 merchants crowded into the back room of Harrison's saloon, all of them suspicious and territorial. Eliza stood at the head of the table, very aware that she was the only woman in the room and that half of them thought this was a waste of time. Gentlemen, she began, I know you'd rather be anywhere else, but the fact is, this town is changing. More people are coming. Competition is increasing. If you keep fighting each other, you'll all lose. But if you work together, you can control the market. How? Whitmore asked skeptically. Coordination. You're all ordering supplies separately, paying separate shipping costs, competing on the same goods. If you pool orders, you reduce costs and increase leverage with suppliers. You can negotiate better prices, faster delivery, exclusive access to certain goods. And who controls this pooled ordering? Harrison asked. Because I'm not letting Whitmore decide what I stock. You each maintain autonomy over your inventory, but the association negotiates as a group. We create a system where everyone benefits without sacrificing independence. They argued for 2 hours. About logistics, about trust, about who would keep the books. Eliza listened, mediated, suggested compromises. By the end, they'd agreed to a trial run, One bulk order, shared shipping, coordinated timing. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a start. Walking home that night, Eliza felt the baby move for the first time. A flutter so faint she almost thought she'd imagined it. She stopped in the middle of the street, hand pressed to her stomach, waiting for it to happen again. There. Stronger this time. A tiny kick against her palm. She started crying without meaning to. Relief, joy, terror, all of it mixed together until she couldn't tell which emotion was which. Caleb found her standing there, tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything." The baby moved. His eyes went wide. "Just now?" "Yes." He dropped to his knees in the mud, pressed his ear against her stomach. She laughed through her tears, running her fingers through his hair. "You won't be able to hear anything yet. It's too early." "I don't care. Let me try anyway." They stayed like that for several minutes, him kneeling in the mud listening for sounds he couldn't possibly hear, her standing with her hands on his shoulders, both of them hoping for things they were afraid to say out loud. The bulk order arrived 6 weeks later, 3 wagons full of goods that had cost half what they would have paid individually. The merchants were pleased, surprised, and suddenly much more interested in Eliza's ideas. She leveraged that goodwill into other projects. A shared warehouse to reduce individual storage costs. A rotating schedule for supply runs that saved time and money. A pricing agreement that prevented destructive competition while still allowing individual flexibility. Some ideas worked, some failed spectacularly. But the merchants were listening now, and that was more than she'd had before. The town changed around them. New families arrived, drawn by stories of work and stability. The school grew to 20 students. Someone opened a bakery. A doctor with actual medical training set up practice, replacing the drunk who'd been calling himself a physician. Hecla was growing. Not quickly, not smoothly, but growing nonetheless. And with growth came new problems. A rancher named Colton moved in with a herd of cattle and a crew of men who thought laws were suggestions. They drank hard, fought harder, and treated the town like their personal playground. Caleb arrested 3 of them for assault within the first week. Colton showed up at the jail personally, a big man with a bigger ego and the kind of money that made people nervous. "You arrested my men," he said. "Your men broke someone's jaw. That's assault." "It was a bar fight. Happens all the time." "Not in my town." Colton smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Your town? Last I checked, this was public territory. I've got as much right to be here as anyone." "You've got the right to be here. Your men don't have the right to hurt people." "They'll pay a fine, whatever's fair. Then you let them go." "They'll stand trial. If the judge sets bail, they can pay it. Otherwise, they wait." Colton's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Marshal. I employ a lot of men. I bring money into this town. You don't want me as an enemy. And I don't want to be bought. So we're at an impasse." After Colton left, Caleb stood at the window, watching him go. "That's going to be a problem," he said. Eliza had been in the corner, pretending to read while actually listening to every word. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that ends with someone dead." He wasn't being dramatic. She could hear the certainty in his voice, the weight of experience. "What are you going to do?" "My job. And hope it doesn't get me killed." The trial happened 3 days later. The judge, a circuit rider who showed up every few months, found all 3 men guilty and fined them $20 each plus medical costs for the victim. Colton paid it without complaint, and his men walked free. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 2 nights later, someone set fire to the school. Eliza woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of shouting. By the time she and Caleb got there, half the building was engulfed. The volunteer fire brigade managed to save the church next door, but the school burned to the ground. Eliza stood in the street, watching her work turn to ash, and felt something break inside her. "We'll rebuild," Caleb said, his arm around her shoulders. "With what money? The town barely afforded it the first time." "We'll find a way." But his voice lacked conviction. They both knew this was a message. Push back against Colton, and there would be consequences. The next morning, Eliza went to see Davies again. He listened to her proposal without interruption, his expression unreadable. "You're asking the merchants to fund a new school," he said when she finished. I'm asking them to invest in the town's future. Educated children become productive adults. Productive adults build thriving communities. It's not charity, it's self-interest. And if I say no, then you prove that you care more about short-term profit than long-term stability. And eventually, this town will eat itself alive. Davies studied her for a long moment. You're very good at this. At what? Making people feel like doing the right thing is actually in their best interest. Is it working? He smiled. I'll bring it to the association. No promises. The association voted to fund the new school 3-2, with Whitmore and one other merchant opposing. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. Construction started within a week. Colton didn't like it. He made that clear by having his men cause problems wherever they could: petty theft, vandalism, intimidation. Nothing Caleb could prove, but everyone knew who was behind it. The tension built like pressure in a sealed kettle. Something was going to explode. It was just a matter of when. The wind came on a humid night in early summer. Caleb was doing his evening rounds when he found one of Colton's men beating a miner behind the saloon. He intervened, which was his job. The man pulled a knife, which was a mistake. Caleb shot him. Not fatally. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spun him around, put him on the ground. But it was the first shooting in Hecla in over a year, and it changed everything. Colton came for Caleb the next day, this time with his entire crew. 20 men, all armed, all looking for blood. Eliza saw them coming from the window of the new school. She ran, shouting for people to get inside, to lock their doors. Mrs. Chen grabbed the children and herded them into the back room. By the time Eliza reached the marshal's office, the street was a standoff. Caleb stood alone outside the jail, rifle in hand. 20 men on horses faced him, Colton at the center. "You shot my man," Colton said. "He pulled a knife. I defended myself." "That's not how I see it." "Don't really care how you see it. Law's the law." Colton's hand moved toward his gun. 20 hands followed suit. Eliza stepped into the street before she could think about it. "Mrs. Rourke," Colton said, surprise in his voice, "this doesn't concern you." "It does when you're threatening my husband in the middle of my town." "Your town?" He laughed. "Lady, you don't own this place. Neither do you. But the difference is we live here. We built this. You just showed up and started breaking things." "I brought jobs, money, progress." "You brought violence and chaos. And if you kill my husband, you won't just answer to the law. You'll answer to everyone in this town who's sick of your bullying." As if summoned, people started emerging from buildings. Miners, merchants, families. Not all of them, but enough. They didn't have guns. Most didn't even have weapons. But they stood in the street behind Eliza and Caleb, a wall of bodies that said, "Not here, not today." Colton looked at them, at Caleb, at Eliza. She could see him calculating odds, weighing consequences. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Yes, it is," Caleb replied. "You leave now, we'll forget this happened. You stay, and I'll arrest every one of you for conspiracy to commit murder. Your choice." For a long, terrible moment, it could have gone either way. Then Colton turned his horse and rode away. His men followed. Eliza's legs nearly gave out. Caleb caught her, held her up. "That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen," he said. "I know, don't ever make me do it again." The crowd dispersed slowly, people touching Caleb's shoulder as they passed, nodding to Eliza. Silent acknowledgement of what had almost happened and what they'd prevented together. That night, Caleb held her until she stopped shaking. "We can't keep doing this," she whispered. "Every time we make progress, someone tries to tear it down." "I know." "So what do we do?" He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was steady. "We keep going. We keep building. And we trust that what we're making is stronger than what they're trying to destroy." It wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't even particularly comforting. But it was honest, and honesty was the rule they'd agreed to. So she nodded against his chest and tried to believe him. Tried to believe that love and stubbornness and the slow accumulation of small victories would be enough to survive what was coming. Colton left town 3 days later, taking his cattle and his crew with him. Word spread that he'd found better grazing land south. But everyone knew the truth. He'd lost the standoff, lost face, and men like Colton didn't stick around where they couldn't dominate. Caleb watched the last of the wagons disappear over the ridge, his expression unreadable. "You think he'll come back?" Eliza asked. "Eventually. Men like that always do, but not for a while. She was 7 months pregnant now, her belly round and impossible to hide. Moving was harder, breathing was harder, everything required twice the effort it had before. But the baby was strong, kicking constantly, keeping her awake at night, making its presence impossible to ignore. The new school was nearly finished, built larger than before with better materials. The merchants had funded it, but the whole town had helped with construction. Even some of Colton's former crew had stayed behind and put in work, perhaps seeing a chance to be part of something other than destruction. Eliza resumed teaching in a temporary space, the back room of the general store, while construction continued. The children were restless, difficult, testing her patience daily. But she'd learned that restlessness meant they were thinking, and thinking meant they were learning. Tommy had started asking about engineering, how bridges were built, how water systems worked, how you turned ideas into structures. Eliza didn't have all the answers, but she helped him find books, encouraged his questions, watched him sketch designs in the margins of his schoolwork. "You could build things someday," she told him. "Real things. Important things." "Out here?" He looked skeptical. "Why not? Someone has to build the towns, the roads, the infrastructure. Might as well be someone who grew up understanding what people actually need." He didn't respond, but she saw something shift in his expression, the possibility settling into his mind like a seed. May had become her unofficial assistant, helping with the younger children, organizing materials, even teaching basic lessons when Eliza needed to rest. The girl had a gift for patience that Eliza envied. "You'd make a good teacher," Eliza told her one afternoon. May smiled shyly. "I just remember what it's like not to know things. It makes it easier to explain." At 8 years old, she was already wiser than most adults Eliza had known back east. The Merchant Association had evolved beyond Eliza's original vision. They weren't just coordinating orders anymore. They were making collective decisions about town development, infrastructure improvements, even social programs. Davies had proposed using association funds to build a proper medical clinic. Harrison wanted a telegraph line. Whitmore, surprisingly, had suggested a lending library. "People need more than just food and shelter," he'd said at the last meeting. "They need culture, civilization. Otherwise, we're just animals surviving, not humans thriving." Eliza had nearly fallen out of her chair. Whitmore arguing for culture, the same man who'd fought her on every proposal for months. "What changed your mind?" she'd asked him afterward. He'd shrugged, uncomfortable with the question. "My daughter's learning to read. She came home yesterday and read me a whole page from a book. I realized that's worth more than any profit margin I'll ever see." Small victories. They added up. But with progress came new tensions. The town was growing faster than its infrastructure could support. Housing was scarce. Jobs were competitive. The delicate balance they'd achieved was straining under the weight of too many people, too many needs, too few resources. A fight broke out at the saloon between a miner and a rancher over a card game. Then another between two merchants over a business deal gone wrong. Then a third involving someone's wife and someone else's wandering eyes. Caleb spent his days breaking up fights and his nights worrying about the next one. The jail cells were full more often than empty. He hired a deputy, a former soldier named Marcus who'd lost an arm in the war but could still shoot straight and think clearly. It helped, but not enough. "This town's getting too big for one marshal," Marcus said one evening. "I know." "So what are you going to do about it?" "Hell if I know." Eliza was at the school when she felt the first real contraction. Not Braxton Hicks, which she'd been having for weeks. This was different, sharp, insistent, a tightening that started in her back and wrapped around her belly like a band. She gripped the edge of her desk, breathing through it. When it passed, she looked at the clock. 2 in the afternoon. Caleb was doing rounds on the far side of town. "Mrs. Chen," she called out. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Mrs. Chen appeared immediately, took one look at Eliza's face, and understood. "How far apart?" "That was the first one." "Then we have time. Let me get the children settled, then I'll walk you home." Eliza nodded, grateful for the calm authority in Mrs. Chen's voice. The woman had delivered 3 children herself and helped birth a dozen others. If anyone could keep Eliza from panicking, it was her. By the time they reached the house, Eliza had had 2 more contractions. Still far apart, still manageable. But the reality was setting in. This was happening. Today, tomorrow, soon. The baby was coming. Mrs. Chen sent May to find Caleb and the doctor. Then she helped Eliza out of her dress and into a nightgown, got her settled on the bed with pillows propped behind her back. First babies take their time, she said. Could be hours, could be a day. Try to rest between contractions. Rest, as if that were possible, with her heart hammering and her mind racing through everything that could go wrong. Women died in childbirth all the time out here. Babies died. Both died. The statistics were grim, and Eliza had heard enough stories to fuel a lifetime of nightmares. Caleb arrived within 20 minutes, breathless and pale. How bad is it? Not bad yet, but it started. He sat on the edge of the bed, took her hand. His palm was sweating. You're more nervous than I am, she observed. I've got reason to be. She squeezed his hand. I'm not Sarah. This isn't then. I'm going to be fine. You can't know that. No, but I can believe it, and so can you. The doctor arrived an hour later, smelling like whiskey, but moving with practiced efficiency. He examined Eliza, asked questions about timing and pain levels, then settled into a chair to wait. Could be tonight, could be tomorrow morning, he said. First babies are unpredictable. Caleb looked like he wanted to shoot something, or someone. Eliza almost laughed at his expression. Go do something useful, she told him. Walk rounds, check on the town. I'll still be here when you get back. I'm not leaving you. Yes, you are. Because if you sit here staring at me like I'm dying for the next 12 hours, I will actually murder you. Mrs. Chen hid a smile. She's right. First-time fathers are worse than useless. Go. We'll send Marcus if anything changes. Reluctantly, Caleb left. Eliza could hear him pacing on the porch for 10 minutes before finally walking away. The contractions continued through the evening, growing closer together, but still bearable. Mrs. Chen made tea, told stories about her own children's births, kept Eliza's mind occupied. The doctor dozed in the chair, waking periodically to check her progress. Night fell. The contractions intensified. Eliza gripped the bed frame and breathed through them, counting seconds until they passed. In between, she rested, gathering strength for the next wave. Caleb returned around midnight. He looked haggard, like he'd aged 10 years in 6 hours. Any change? Getting closer. Still a while yet. Eliza reached for his hand. Stay this time. I need you here. He pulled a chair close to the bed, sat where she could see him. His presence was anchoring, solid. She focused on his face during contractions, used him as a point of reference when the pain threatened to sweep her away. Around 3 a.m, the doctor sat up straighter. All right, Mrs. Rourke, time to get serious. The next 2 hours were a blur of pain and effort, and Mrs. Chen's calm voice telling her to push, breathe, rest, push again. Caleb held her hand so tightly she thought he might break her fingers. She might have screamed. She definitely cursed. At one point, she told Caleb this was entirely his fault and she was never doing this again. Then the doctor said, "One more. Give me one more good push." She did. And suddenly there was a sound, a thin, outraged wail that cut through the room like a knife. "It's a girl," the doctor announced. Eliza collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and shaking. The doctor worked quickly, cutting the cord, cleaning the baby. Then he placed a tiny, furious creature on Eliza's chest. She was perfect, red-faced and squalling, with a cap of dark hair and eyes that would probably be blue but might turn brown. She had Caleb's chin and Eliza's nose, and tiny fists that waved in indignation at being born. Eliza started crying, couldn't help it. Relief, joy, love so intense it hurt, all of it flooding through her at once. Caleb was crying too, tears streaming down his face as he stared at his daughter. He reached out with one finger, touched her tiny hand. She grabbed it immediately, held on with surprising strength. "She's real," he whispered. "She's real," Eliza agreed. They named her Catherine, after the daughter Caleb had lost. It felt right, like honoring the past while embracing the future. A way of saying that grief and joy could coexist, that loss didn't have to mean the end of hope. The first week was chaos. Catherine ate constantly, slept in random bursts, cried for reasons they couldn't always identify. Eliza was exhausted in ways she hadn't known were possible. Her body ached, her breasts hurt, her emotions swung wildly between elation and despair. Caleb was terrified of holding the baby at first, convinced he'd break her. But Eliza insisted, and gradually he learned how to support her head, how to rock her when she fussed, how to change her diaper without getting peed on. Mostly. Mrs. Chen brought food, offered advice, took the baby for a few hours so Eliza could sleep. Other women from town stopped by with gifts and casseroles and conflicting opinions about everything from feeding schedules to sleeping positions. The school remained closed for 2 weeks while Eliza recovered. Some parents complained, but most understood. May visited daily, desperate to hold the baby, cooing over Catherine like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Can I help?" she asked. "When you go back to teaching? I could watch her sometimes." Eliza was touched by the offer, but hesitant. "That's a lot of responsibility. I helped raise my cousin back in China. I know how to care for babies." After some discussion, they worked out an arrangement. May would help with Catherine during school hours in exchange for advanced lessons in mathematics and literature. It was practical and gave May something she desperately wanted, knowledge that would serve her later in life. Caleb was a different man with Catherine. Softer, more open. He talked to her while she lay in her cradle, telling her stories about Sarah, about his own childhood, about the future he hoped she'd have. Eliza would listen from the other room, her heart swelling. But parenthood didn't pause the rest of their lives. The town still needed them. Problems still needed solving. A week after Catherine was born, a family showed up at Eliza's door. New arrivals, desperate and dirty, with 3 children who looked half-starved. "We heard there was work here," the father said. His name was William, and his wife, Sarah, a different Sarah, stood behind him with a baby on her hip. "We've been traveling for 6 weeks. We're out of money, out of food. If you can't help us, I don't know what we'll do." Eliza looked at their faces, saw the same desperation she'd felt stepping off that train 18 months ago. She invited them in, fed them what she had, then sent word to the Merchant Association. Davies showed up an hour later, took one look at the family, and sighed. "How many more like this are coming?" he asked. "As many as here that Hecla is a place where people can survive," Eliza said. "We can't feed everyone who shows up." "No, but we can feed the ones who will work. Give them a chance to prove themselves. That's what you did for me." He rubbed his face, looking older than his years. "You're going to bankrupt us with your conscience. Or make us prosper with it. Time will tell." William and his family got jobs, housing, a chance. They weren't the last. Over the next 2 months, a dozen more families arrived. Some worked out, some didn't. But the town absorbed them, adapted, grew. The new school opened in September with 32 students and 2 teachers, Eliza and a young woman named Charlotte, who'd been educated back east and was eager to escape Boston society. They split the students by age and ability, developed curriculum, established routines. Catherine came to school with Eliza most days, sleeping in a basket or being passed around by students during breaks. The children loved her, and she seemed to thrive on the attention. Tommy, now 12, had taken to engineering with the focus of someone who'd found his calling. He'd built a model bridge out of scrap wood that actually held weight. Davies saw it and offered him an apprenticeship with his ranch's blacksmith and carpenter. "The boy's got a gift," Davies told Eliza. "Be a waste not to develop it." Tommy's mother cried when she heard. Her son, the one she'd thought would spend his life breaking rocks in mines, was going to learn a trade. Maybe build a future, deal small victories. They kept adding up. But not everything was victory. Marcus, Caleb's deputy, was killed in November. A drunk miner pulled a gun during an arrest, fired wild. The bullet caught Marcus in the throat. He died before the doctor could even arrive. Caleb took it hard, blamed himself for not being there, for hiring someone he knew was vulnerable, for 100 things he couldn't have controlled. He attended the funeral stone-faced, stood by the grave long after everyone else had left. Eliza found him there at sunset, staring at the fresh-turned earth. "It should have been me," he said. "No, it shouldn't have been anyone. He had a wife, kids." "I know." "I talked him into taking the job, told him it would be safe." "You didn't know this would happen." You can't protect everyone from everything. He turned to her, and his expression was raw. Then what's the point? What am I doing this for if people still die? She didn't have an easy answer. The truth was, people did die. Out here, death was constant, arbitrary, cruel. You could do everything right and still lose everything. You're doing it because someone has to, she said finally. Because without you, more people would die. Because Marcus's death matters, but so does every person you've saved. You don't get to count one and ignore the others. That's not how it feels. I know, but it's how it is. He didn't respond, just pulled her close and held on like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. They buried Marcus next to other pioneers who died building Hecla. Miners, mothers, children, dreamers. The graveyard was getting crowded. Another sign of growth, though not one anyone celebrated. Caleb hired a new deputy, a woman this time, a former Pinkerton agent named Ruth, who'd gotten tired of tracking criminals and wanted to prevent crimes instead. She was sharp, competent, and didn't take nonsense from anyone. You sure about this? Davies asked when he heard. A woman deputy. She's more qualified than half the men who applied, Caleb said. And she doesn't have anything to prove, which makes her dangerous in all the right ways. Ruth proved him right within a week, disarming a fight at the saloon with nothing but words and presence. Harrison was so impressed he offered her free drinks, which she declined. I don't drink on duty, she told him, and I'm always on duty. Winter came early that year, hard and fast. By December, they were snowed in again. The whole town hunkered down against the cold. But this winter felt different from the first one Eliza had experienced. They had more supplies, better organization, stronger community. The work program started up again automatically, without anyone needing to propose it. The merchants knew what worked. The miners knew where to go. It had become tradition, routine, expected. Christmas came, a celebration more practical than religious, focused on community rather than ceremony. The children performed a play at the school. The merchants donated food for a town dinner. Caleb played fiddle, something Eliza hadn't known he could do, and people danced in the saloon. Catherine was 6 months old, sitting up on her own, reaching for everything, laughing at sounds that shouldn't be funny. She was the center of every gathering, passed from person to person, showered with attention. She's going to be spoiled, Caleb observed. Probably. But she'll also know she's loved. There are worse things. On New Year's Eve, they stood on their porch, Catherine bundled between them, watching the town celebrate. Fireworks, improvised and slightly dangerous, lit up the sky. People sang, shouted, toasted the year ahead. We made it, Eliza said. We did. Think we'll make another year? Caleb looked at her, at Catherine, at the town spread out before them. Yeah, I think we will. It wasn't certainty, but it was hope, and hope was enough. January brought a letter from the territorial governor. Hecla had grown large enough to incorporate as an official town. That meant elections, formal government, legal recognition. It meant they'd gone from a frontier settlement to something real. The council met to discuss it. For once, everyone agreed. They'd incorporate. Hold elections in March. Establish proper town governance. Who's going to run for mayor? Harrison asked. Everyone looked at Davies. He shook his head immediately. Not me. I've got a ranch to run. Whitmore? Absolutely not. Harrison? I sell liquor. I can't be mayor. The room fell silent. Then Charlotte, the new teacher, spoke up. What about Mrs. Rourke? Every head turned toward Eliza. She nearly dropped Catherine. What? No, I'm not. I can't. Why not? Charlotte pressed. You've been mediating disputes, organizing programs, solving problems for a year. You're already doing the job. Might as well make it official. I have a baby and a school to run, and you're still better qualified than anyone else in this room, Davies interrupted. I hate to admit it, but she's right. You'd make a good mayor. Caleb was watching her with an unreadable expression. She tried to catch his eye, looking for support, for an out. It's your decision, he said. But for what it's worth, I think you'd be excellent. Traitor. She wanted to say no. Wanted to explain all the reasons it was a terrible idea. But looking around the room, seeing the expectant faces, she realized something. This was what she'd been building toward all along. Not intentionally, but inevitably. She'd come to Hecla to survive. She'd stayed to help, and now she had the chance to shape the town's future in a real, lasting way. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Everyone nodded, accepting that as a yes. Over the next 2 months, Eliza wrestled with the decision. She talked to Caleb, to Mrs. Chen, to Charlotte. She made lists of pros and cons. She imagined scenarios where it worked and scenarios where it failed spectacularly. In the end, it came down to a simple question. Could she stand back and watch someone else make decisions she knew were wrong? The answer was no. She announced her candidacy in late February. 2 other people were running, a merchant she didn't know well, and a rancher who thought women shouldn't vote, let alone hold office. The campaign, such as it was, consisted of a series of town meetings where candidates presented their visions. Eliza's vision was simple: sustainable growth, fair governance, investment in education and infrastructure. The same things she'd been arguing for all along. The merchant offered tax breaks and business incentives. The rancher offered to make Hecla great without explaining how or when it had stopped being great. Election day was March 15th. The whole town turned out, men and women both, which caused the rancher to file a protest that was immediately dismissed. Voting happened in the church, ballots dropped in a locked box, counted by a committee of volunteers. Eliza won with 60% of the vote. She stood in front of the crowd that night, Catherine on her hip, Caleb beside her, and tried to find words for what she was feeling. "I came to this town 18 months ago as a stranger running from ruin," she said. "You took me in. You gave me a chance. You let me prove that I could contribute. Now I promise to do the same for everyone who comes after me, to build a town where people have opportunities, where children get educated, where everyone is treated fairly under the law. It won't be perfect. I'll make mistakes, but I'll work harder than anyone to make Hecla a place we're all proud to call home." The applause was deafening. Catherine started crying from the noise, and Eliza had to pass her to Caleb so she could shake hands with what felt like every person in town. Later, walking home through the dark, Caleb said, "You know this is going to be impossible, right?" "I know." "You're going to have people mad at you constantly. Every decision will make someone unhappy." "I know." "And you're still going to do it." "I am." He shook his head, smiling. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the craziest." "Can it be both?" "With you, it usually is." They reached home, put Catherine to bed, and stood together in the quiet house they'd built into a home. Outside, Hecla slept, unaware of how much had changed and how much was about to. Eliza thought about that train ride 18 months ago, about stepping into a blizzard and finding Caleb waiting, about a marriage born from desperation that had become something neither of them had expected. They'd survived. More than that, they'd built something worth surviving for. And this was just the beginning. Being mayor was exactly as impossible as Caleb had predicted. Eliza's first week in office brought 16 complaints, 3 property disputes, 2 requests for town funding that exceeded the entire budget, and 1 fistfight that broke out during a town council meeting when a rancher and a miner couldn't agree on water rights. She sat at her new desk in the tiny office they'd carved out of the back of the general store, Catherine napping in a basket at her feet, and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. "You look like you're reconsidering your life choices," Ruth said from the doorway. "Every single one of them." "That's how you know you're doing it right." Ruth stepped inside, handed her a cup of coffee. "Caleb said to tell you he's handling the Miller situation." "What Miller situation?" "The one where Miller's cow got into Thompson's garden and ate half his vegetables, and now Thompson wants the cow seized as compensation." Eliza rubbed her temples. "It's a cow. They can work it out." "You'd think? But Thompson's convinced this is part of a larger conspiracy to destroy his livelihood." "It's a cow." "I know. Caleb knows. Thompson does not know." This was her life now, cows and conspiracies and grown men acting like children. She'd traded teaching actual children for managing adult tantrums, and she wasn't sure it was an improvement. But there were victories too, small ones, but they counted. She'd pushed through funding for a proper well system, bringing clean water to parts of town that had been relying on a contaminated creek. 3 families had gotten sick from that water over the winter. Now they wouldn't. She'd negotiated a treaty of sorts between the miners and ranchers over land use, establishing clear boundaries and shared resources. It wasn't perfect, but it stopped the constant skirmishes that had been bleeding into town violence. She'd convinced the territorial government to fund a telegraph line to Hekla, connecting them to the wider world in ways that would bring opportunities and information. The line would be completed by summer, and she'd started a program to help new arrivals integrate into town life, job placement, temporary housing, basic supplies. The same kind of help she'd needed when she'd arrived, formalized and funded. Not everyone was happy. The rancher who'd run against her filed complaint after complaint, arguing that she was overstepping her authority, spending too much, favoring minors over ranchers. He rallied a small group of supporters who showed up at every council meeting to voice their displeasure. Eliza listened to their complaints, addressed the legitimate ones, ignored the rest. It was exhausting, but it was also necessary. Democracy was messy. She'd known that going in. What she hadn't known was how personal it would feel when people attacked her decisions. Every criticism felt like an indictment of her character. Every failure, like proof she wasn't qualified. "You're taking it too hard," Caleb told her one night. She was pacing their bedroom, rehashing a council meeting that had gone badly. "Half those complaints are just noise, people who like to hear themselves talk. And the other half? Legitimate concerns you're already addressing. You can't please everyone, Eliza. You're not supposed to." "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Make the best decisions you can with the information you have. Help as many people as possible. Accept that some will hate you for it anyway." She stopped pacing, looked at him. "That's a terrible job description." "It's an honest one." Catherine started fussing in her cradle. Caleb went to her automatically, picking her up with the ease of practice. She was 10 months old now, trying to walk, getting into everything, talking in garbled syllables that occasionally sounded like real words. Watching him with her, Eliza felt something settle in her chest. They'd built this. Not just Catherine, but this whole life. This partnership that worked because they'd both committed to making it work. "I'm pregnant again," she said. Caleb nearly dropped the baby. "What?" "About 6 weeks, I think. I wasn't sure, but now I am." He sat down heavily, Catherine still in his arms. "We're having another baby." "Yes." "While you're running a town and teaching and while I'm doing all of it, yes." She sat beside him. "I know the timing isn't great. The timing is terrible." But he was smiling when he said it. "How do you feel about it?" "Terrified. Excited. Exhausted already, which is probably a preview of the next 18 years. He laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "We're going to need a bigger house. We're going to need a lot of things." That night, lying in bed with his hand on her still flat stomach, Caleb said, "I never thought I'd have this again. A family, a future worth planning for." "Neither did I." "We did it, though, despite everything." "Because of everything," Eliza corrected. "The hard parts made us stronger, made this possible." He was quiet for a moment. "Sarah would have liked you. She'd have thought you were too stubborn, but she'd have liked you anyway." It was the highest compliment he could give, and Eliza knew it. "I wish I could have known her." "Me too, but I think she'd be glad I found you, that I didn't give up." "You almost did." "I know. Then you showed up in a blizzard and wouldn't let me." She turned to face him in the dark. "I love you. I don't say it enough, but I do." "I know. I love you too, even when you're being impossible." "Especially then." "Especially then," he agreed. Spring brought floods. The snowmelt was worse than usual, turning the streets into rivers and washing out half the roads. Eliza spent 2 weeks coordinating emergency responses, sandbagging, evacuations, temporary shelters for families whose homes flooded. Tommy, now working as Davies' apprentice, designed a drainage system that diverted water away from the low-lying areas. It was rough, improvised, but it worked. Davies was so impressed he gave the boy a raise and started teaching him surveying. "That kid's going to build this whole territory someday," Davies told Eliza. "I know, and he's going to remember that Hekla gave him his start." The floods destroyed the old jail, which had been a ramshackle building barely held together by hope and stubbornness. Caleb used it as an opportunity to push for a new one, larger, sturdier, with proper cells and a separate office for him and Ruth. The council approved it with minimal argument. Even the rancher who opposed everything Eliza proposed voted yes. Progress came in strange packages. Construction started in May. The whole town turned out to help, even people who'd been arrested in the old jail at some point. There was something cathartic about building the place that might one day hold you, Eliza supposed. May graduated from school that spring. At 14, she was already more educated than most adults in town. Eliza had taught her everything she could, and Charlotte had filled in the gaps. The girl could read Latin, do complex mathematics, discuss philosophy and history and literature. "What are you going to do now?" Eliza asked her. May looked uncertain. "I don't know. Mother wants me to marry, settle down, but I want more." "More what?" "More everything. I want to learn, to see things, to be more than just someone's wife." Eliza understood that hunger. She'd felt it herself back east, suffocating under the weight of expectations. "What if you became a teacher?" Eliza suggested. "Charlotte and I need help. The school keeps growing. We could use someone who knows the students, understands what they need." May's face lit up. "Really? You'd hire me?" "You'd have to train, learn proper pedagogy, but yes, I think you'd be excellent." Mrs. Chen cried when she heard, not from disappointment, but from pride. Her daughter, a teacher, it was more than she'd ever imagined possible. "You gave her this," she told Eliza. "You gave her a future. She earned it herself. I just opened a door." Sometimes that's all someone needs. Summer brought the telegraph line. The first message came through in July, a test transmission from the territorial capital. Then real messages started flowing. News, business communications, personal correspondence. Hecla was connected to the world in ways it had never been before. With connection came opportunity. Merchants could order supplies faster. Families could communicate with relatives back east. The town could coordinate with other settlements, share resources, warn of dangers. But connection also brought complications. Word spread about Hecla's growth and stability. More people came, dozens at first, then hundreds. By August, the population had doubled. Housing couldn't keep up. Jobs became scarce. The delicate balance they'd achieved started tipping. Eliza called an emergency council meeting. "We can't sustain this growth rate," she said. "We don't have the infrastructure, the resources, the organization." "So what do you suggest?" Harrison asked. "Turn people away?" "No, but we need to be smarter about integration. We need housing development, job creation, expanded services. We need a plan." They spent 3 days hammering out that plan. Housing lots would be sold at cost to families willing to build. The Merchant Association would coordinate job placement. The school would expand again, adding a third teacher. A medical clinic would finally be built, with a real doctor who'd agreed to relocate from St. Louis. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious, but doing nothing wasn't an option. Eliza was 6 months pregnant by then, moving slower, tired constantly. Catherine was walking now, getting into everything, requiring constant supervision. Balancing motherhood, teaching, and running a town left Eliza feeling like she was always failing at something. "You can't do everything," Charlotte told her one afternoon. They were reviewing lesson plans while Catherine destroyed a pile of books in the corner. "I know, but I don't know what to stop doing." "You could delegate more. Let other people handle things. And if they do it wrong? Then they learn, same way you did." It was sensible advice. Eliza hated sensible advice, mostly because it was usually right. She started delegating. Let Ruth handle more of the law enforcement coordination. Let Charlotte take over day-to-day school operations. Let Davies manage infrastructure development. Let the council members actually do the jobs they'd been elected to do. It helped. Not completely. She still worked too much, slept too little, worried constantly. But it helped. In September, Colton came back. He rode into town alone, no crew, no cattle. Just a man on a horse, looking older and meaner than Eliza remembered. He stopped at the marshal's office, dismounted, walked inside. Caleb was at his desk. Ruth was checking weapons inventory. They both looked up when Colton entered. "Marshal," Colton said. "Colton, thought we made it clear you weren't welcome. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to settle a debt." That got their attention. Colton reached into his coat, both Caleb and Ruth tensed, and pulled out a stack of bills. I owe the town for damages from when I was here before. I'm paying it back, with interest. He set the money on the desk. $2,000, by Caleb's quick count, more than enough to cover the school fire and then some. Why? Caleb asked. Colton shrugged. Because I'm trying to be less of a bastard than I used to be. Not sure it's working, but I'm trying. Consider it an apology. We don't need your money. Yeah, you do. I saw the tents at the edge of town. You're bursting at the seams. Use it for housing, infrastructure, whatever. Just take it and let me leave with a clear conscience. Caleb and Ruth exchanged glances. This felt like a trap. But looking at Colton's face, Eliza, who'd been listening from the doorway, saw only exhaustion and something that might have been regret. We'll take it, she said, stepping into the office. And we'll put it to good use. Thank you. Colton looked at her pregnant belly, at the town beyond the window. You've done something here. Something real. I tried to destroy it and I was wrong. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. It's worth something, Eliza said. He nodded, tipped his hat, and left. They watched him ride away, disappearing into the distance. That was unexpected, Ruth said. People change, Caleb replied. Not often, but sometimes. They used Colton's money to build 20 new houses. Small, basic, but solid. Families moved in within weeks, grateful for roofs over their heads. The tent city shrank, then disappeared entirely. Eliza gave birth to their second daughter in October. The labor was faster this time, less terrifying. She knew what to expect, knew her body could handle it. The baby came screaming into the world at dawn, healthy and furious. They named her Sarah. Caleb held her with tears streaming down his face, looking at Eliza with an expression that held more love than she'd thought possible. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For giving me back everything I thought I'd lost. 2 daughters now. Catherine, who was learning to talk in full sentences and had inherited Eliza's stubbornness. Sarah, brand new and perfect, and already wrapping her father around her tiny finger. Their family, hard-won and precious. Winter came again, the third since Eliza had arrived. But this winter was different. They were prepared. Supplies were stocked. Housing was solid. The community was strong. When the first snow fell, people gathered in the saloon and celebrated rather than hunkered down in fear. Hecla had survived. More than that, it had thrived. The town council met in December to discuss the future. They'd grown large enough to apply for county seat status, which would bring government offices, more funding, official recognition. It'll change everything, Davies said. We'll have responsibilities, oversight, bureaucracy. We already have all of that, Eliza pointed out. This just makes it official. They voted unanimously to apply. The process would take months, maybe years. But the fact that they were even having the conversation showed how far they'd come. After the meeting, Eliza walked home through the snow. The streets were lit by lamps now, regular spacing, oil burning, and bright. The buildings were painted, maintained, cared for. The school had glass windows and a bell tower. The medical clinic was taking patients. The jail was solid brick with actual locks. This wasn't the dying frontier town she'd arrived in. This was a community, a home. Caleb was waiting on the porch, both girls bundled in his arms. Catherine was chattering about something incomprehensible. Sarah was sleeping, tiny mouth open, completely trusting. How'd it go? He asked. We're applying for county seat status. That's ambitious. That's us. He smiled, shifted Sarah carefully, and kissed Eliza. It was a good kiss, warm and familiar, and promising more later when the girls were asleep. I'm proud of you, he said, of everything you've built here. We built it, together. Yeah, we did. They went inside into the house they'd expanded twice now, with rooms for both girls and space for the family they were becoming. The fire was warm, the coffee was hot, and outside the snow fell soft and steady. The years that followed brought changes, as years always do. Catherine grew into a fierce, brilliant girl who argued with everyone and had opinions about everything. Sarah was quieter but no less determined, with a gift for understanding people that made her invaluable as a mediator even as a child. Eliza served 2 more terms as mayor, then stepped down to focus on the school, which had grown to serve over 100 students with 5 teachers. She wrote curriculum, trained new teachers, developed programs that other towns started copying. Caleb remained marshal until his body told him it was time to retire. Ruth took over the position, the first female marshal in the territory. Caleb spent his retirement building furniture, teaching Catherine to shoot, and spoiling Sarah shamelessly. Tommy became a civil engineer designing roads and bridges and water systems across Montana. He never forgot where he'd started, and he made sure every project he touched included plans for schools and community spaces. May opened her own school in a neighboring town, taking everything she'd learned and building something new. Mrs. Chen lived to see her grandchildren attend that school, taught by her daughter. The Merchant Association became a model for cooperative business practices, studied and replicated throughout the West. Davies wrote a book about it that sold surprisingly well. Hecla became a county seat in 1887, then a hub for the railroad in 1892. By the turn of the century, it had 3,000 residents, electric lights, and a reputation as one of the most progressive towns in Montana. But for Eliza, the real measure of success wasn't population or infrastructure. It was the families who stayed, the children who grew up educated and hopeful, the community that had chosen cooperation over conflict. It was the fact that when new arrivals stepped off the train, lost and desperate, there were people ready to help them, the same way she'd been helped. 20 years after that first blizzard, Eliza stood at the train station watching another young woman arrive. She looked scared and determined, clutching a worn carpet bag, eyes scanning the platform for someone she'd only known through letters. The woman's fiancé stepped forward to greet her. Not a marshal this time, but a shopkeeper. Not running from scandal, but seeking opportunity. Different details, same desperation. Eliza watched them meet, watched the awkwardness and uncertainty and fragile hope. She remembered that feeling. The terror of committing to a stranger, the gamble of starting over, the faith required to believe things could be better. She caught the young woman's eye and smiled. The woman smiled back. Tentative but real. Another story beginning. Another chance at transformation. Caleb came up beside her, moving slower now but still solid. Catherine was with him, 17 now, brilliant and fierce, about to leave for university back east. Sarah was home with the neighbor, probably causing some kind of chaos. Thinking about old times? He asked. Thinking about how nothing's really changed. People still arrive desperate. The town still takes them in. The work continues. But we're not desperate anymore. No, we're not. He took her hand. His fingers were weathered, scarred from decades of hard work. Hers matched. They'd built this life with their hands, their hearts, their refusal to give up when giving up would have been easier. Do you ever regret it? He asked, stepping off that train. Eliza looked at him, at the gray in his beard, the lines around his eyes, the strength that had never quite faded. She thought about their daughters, their town, their life. Not once, she said. Not ever. Even when things were hard? Especially then. The hard parts made the good parts matter. Catherine rolled her eyes. You two are getting sappy again. We're allowed, Caleb said. We're old. You're not that old. Old enough to embarrass our children. That's the best part of aging. They walked home through streets Eliza had helped plan, past buildings she'd helped fund, through a community she'd helped build. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and orange. Somewhere, a child laughed. A door opened, releasing the smell of dinner cooking. A dog barked. Ordinary sounds. Precious sounds. That night, after Catherine had gone to bed and Sarah was asleep in her room, Eliza and Caleb sat on their porch, watching the stars. We did all right, Caleb said. We did better than all right. Think they'll remember us? After we're gone? Some will. Others won't. But that's not why we did it. Why did we do it? Eliza considered the question. She thought about that first winter, the desperation, the choice to help Mrs. Chen when it would have been easier to look away. She thought about the work program, the school, the 1,000 small decisions that had added up to a transformed town. Because we could, she said finally, because we were in a position to help, and not helping wasn't an option. That simple? That simple. He pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence. After 20 years, they'd learned that silence could say more than words. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and snow and wood smoke. Winter was coming again. But they were ready. They were always ready now. Inside the house, Catherine's light was still on. Studying, probably. Planning her future with the same determination Eliza had brought to building Hecla. Sarah was dreaming whatever 5-year-olds dreamed about. Probably horses or kittens, or convincing her father to let her stay up late. 2 daughters who would never know hunger or desperation or the terror of having no options. 2 daughters who would grow up believing they could be anything, do anything, because their mother had shown them it was possible. That was legacy enough. "I love you," Caleb said quietly. "I love you too. Even when I'm being stubborn? Especially then." He laughed, and the sound was warm and familiar, and home. They'd started as strangers in a blizzard, bound by necessity rather than choice. They'd survived poverty, violence, loss, and every hardship the frontier could throw at them. They'd built a marriage on honesty and partnership, and the daily choice to keep choosing each other. They'd built a town on the same principles. And looking at Hecla now, thriving, growing, full of possibility, Eliza knew they'd done something that mattered. Not perfect. Nothing was ever perfect. But real, lasting, good. The storm that had brought them together had become legend. Old-timers told the story to newcomers, embellishing details, turning it into myth. The desperate woman and the lonely marshal finding each other in the snow, building something impossible. But the real story was quieter than the myth. It was years of small choices, daily struggles, incremental progress. It was fighting for every victory and accepting every defeat. It was love that grew slowly, tested constantly, proven through action rather than words. It was 2 broken people who decided to build something together and succeeded beyond what either had imagined possible. As the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not peace exactly. Life was too complicated for pure peace, but contentment, satisfaction, the knowledge that she'd done what she set out to do, and then some. She'd survived. She'd thrived. She'd helped others do the same. That was enough, more than enough. It was everything.